Hello everyone, welcome to the Frequency of Genius program. We have an incredible guest this hour, Dr. Samuel Milham. He is the author of Dirty Electricity, Electrification, and the Diseases of Civilization. You know, back in New York City, around the 1880s, they had direct electrification distribution system that was put in. And, there was the magic of electricity, of light. There was a lot of heat in the process, and basically the Pandora's box of unimaginable illness and death came from electricity. And so now when we look at a dirty electricity, there's quite a different story that Dr. Milham has exposed. Dr. Milham is a scientist who first alerted the world about the frightening link between occupational exposure to electromagnetic fields and human disease. Dr. Milham takes readers through his early years in education, following the twisting path that led to his discovery that most of the 20th century diseases of civilization, including cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and suicide, are caused by electromagnetic field exposure. Dr. Milham warns that because of the recent proliferation of radio frequency radiation from cell phones and towers, terrestrial antennas, Wi-Fi and WiMAX systems, broadband internet over power lines, and personal electronic equipment, we may be facing a looming epidemic of morbidity and mortality. In Dirty Electricity, he reveals the steps we must take, personally and as a society, to coexist with the marvelous but dangerous technology. Let's welcome Dr. Milham. Can you please tell us how your book came about?
Well, the book happened because I really got onto this finding, almost unbelievable, that residential electrification was linked to cancers and cardiovascular disease and diabetes and suicide, mortality, that's deaths, using death record information. But I was positive of the association probably around 1990. I think I wrote a paper shortly after that showing that childhood leukemia was almost certainly the age peak that happens with the major leukemia of childhood happened in sync with the gradual spread of residential electrification across this country. Starting, Edison electrified New York City in 1882, and the farms didn't get electricity until mid-50s, 1956. So for a long period of time, you had two big populations in this country. One that had electricity, mostly urban populations. Most cities had electricity by 1900, but the rural areas didn't have it. And if you looked at how the childhood age peak at age 2 through 4 of childhood leukemia developed from nothing. I mean, we didn't have that peak anywhere in the world until electrification. Still don't have it in places without electricity like sub-Saharan Africa. That peak emerged in U.S. mortality data. I looked at the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, and it's clearly associated with something to do with residential electrification. I wrote that paper up, couldn't get it published. Finally, I got it published out of the country, and then I followed it up by looking at all the other causes of death, and they were certainly in the same kettle of fish and associated with residential electrification data. And so I published that, but basically nobody was paying attention to it. I couldn't get interviews. None of the major scientific media or popular programs publicized this really, I think, amazing findings. I said, what the hell, let's write a book about it and maybe get the word out to people who can look after themselves and help themselves. That's really, I wrote the book out of frustration.
So how's the book been received?
Well, it seems to be selling surprisingly well. It's kind of slowed down a little bit lately, but the publisher gave me a star classification, which they only give to those books that sell fairly well. And Barnes & Noble carrying it in their stores now, and you can get it from Barnes and Noble, or you get an app from Amazon. It's under $10. I think it was 99 something last time I looked at it. It's small. It's thin. It's cheap, and everybody should read it. I mean, and the other thing I did is I sprung for a website where you can get all the papers that the book is based on, the scientific papers and some other interesting stuff. And that website is www.sammilham, all one word, SAMMILHAM.com. And that's interesting reading for those of you who want to dig into what I did.
In your research that you did for dirty electricity, what was the most surprising findings that you found that kind of surprised you or you found disturbing?
Oh, well, hell, I started out looking at the cancers. Leukemia has always been related to ionizing radiation. I figured, well, that's probably related to non-ionizing radiation that, from like power frequency distribution systems. But when I got into it, there were two really big surprises. The birth and the death date are close together in the U.S. Vital Statistics books. And it's quite obvious that not only are cancers related to this, but the birth rate went down with electrification. It still does. Any place where they electrify, the birth rate and fertility rates go down. Okay, I think that's really interesting. I think that's the reason why you got all these fertility clinics in the developed world, because the women are having trouble getting pregnancy on account of this. Get pregnant or they lose the fetuses. The other huge surprise, and I couldn't really, when I first found it in the early 90s, couldn't believe it was all related to this, because heart disease, I mean, what about myocardial infarction? Everybody's been brainwashing us for 30 years, saying, well, it's a lipid dysregulation disease, too much fat in your diet, cholesterol, blah, blah, blah. And yet here I had this black and white association with electrification. The other one that was surprising was suicide, but there'd been some early studies with power frequency magnetic fields that related suicide to and residences that had high magnetic fields outside their front doors, and there's a large occupational data set of people who work around electricity have higher suicide rates. Savitz and his group did that. Those are the big surprises. But then I just couldn't believe that the power frequency, the 60 cycle stuff that's delivered here and the 50 cycle here could be responsible for this. And it took the study I did of teachers in a California school to really cement the idea in my mind that it's not the power frequency, it's the high frequency stuff, the dirty electricity caused by switchboard power supplies, by arcing, by sparking. That was the culprit, and that's when I wrote the book.
And for those that are listening, can you clarify any of the misconceptions of what dirty electricity is and how you define it as such?
Okay, well, the term was coined by the utilities because they recognized it a long time ago. And what it is if you have nice clean generation of power, you look at it on the oscilloscope, you get a nice sine wave. Looks like waves up and down, smooth, single line. What happens is dirty electricity is higher frequency stuff, way above 60 cycles, that rides on the wires and on the 60 cycle sine wave. And it was really discovered by Stetzer and Professor Marty Graham working with cows. Their smartness and their genius. These cows were having trouble. They stopped giving milk. They were having trouble being milked, and they aborted. They got sick and died, and they traced it to currents in the ground, in the earth, and in the milking parlors that the cows were exposed to. But they actually measured in the cow's body that it wasn't the 60 cycle, it was the high frequency dirty electricity. Now, when I say dirty electricity, I mean the high-frequency transients and harmonics that are in the power supply, your measurement and your outlets don't belong there. And the way they get there is, until about 40 years ago, we didn't have many devices that made it. I think Edison probably made it inadvertently because he complained about arcing in his big dynamos in New York City. They were called jumbos, and the brushes that picked up the electricity from the commutators, the spinning part, were wearing out the commutator, and he wrote extensively about fixes for that. So he was having arcing problems initially, and that's one of the main causes of this, like a tree hitting a power line that arcs or sparks is delivering dirty electricity down that whole line. And anything that interrupts the current, it's about 30 years ago, any of these modern things that we use, these appliances and transmitters that we use, they all operate on direct current. And the way you get that now from alternating current is you put it through a transistorized device called the switching power supply. And when they interrupt the current, they chop it. And this is how you make dirty electricity. And I've got a simple halogen light that I use for demonstration purposes, and plug that thing in this little box in the lamp base. There's a switching power supply that just creates a ton of that stuff, and it goes back into the wires and throughout your house and into the earth. The other big problem is that the utilities, 25, 30 years ago, they started burning up the neutral return. The way electricity works is it's an electric circuit. All the electricity that comes out to your house or to your business or to your motors has to go back to where it came from, the substation. Okay, and when the grid was originally built, it all went back through the wires. They came out through the wires, went back through the wires. About 25, 30 years ago, they started getting house and factory fires in the neutral return wires. What was happening is that the higher frequencies that are generated by these switching power supplies and by all our electronic junk doesn't like to run in wires. There's a skin effect that runs on the outside of the wire. So effectively, you need a bigger wire to carry the higher frequencies. And so they changed the building codes to require herkier or bigger wires in the buildings. But the utilities, instead of adding bigger wires for the return currents to neutrals, they just started dumping it into the ground. So about some states, as much as 70% of the current that's delivered is returned through the earth. You go out to your favorite telephone pole that's got a transformer on it, and you see it's got 3 taps up on top. The center tap is a neutral, and if it's got a wire running from it to the ground, they're dumping electricity into the ground. And every place I've looked in California here has got that set up. And I measure the currents and the voltage in the ground as a result of this. And many, many places they're very, very high, and they're full of this dirty electricity, the high-frequency stuff.
We'll be right back after this short break. Do you have kids that are failing at math, getting F's instead of A's? Do you stress out when taking time math tests? Do you have college kids that stress out over college exams? There is a solution to the math fears and stresses. It's called Vedic Math. You can find the solution right now by visiting omnigreenlife.com. Would you like your plants and gardens to grow incredibly fast and healthy? Listen to Dan Winter's interview at omnigreenlife.com today to learn more about the amazing Imploder. The Imploder is a magnetic water treatment device that produces a measurable and validated effect on plant growth, seed germination success, and biomass yield. It is a unique technology that combines a magnetic array with a directional nozzle made from a very tough material called Fortron. Here are some of the benefits. Revitalized water can be achieved quickly and easily. Less amount of water is required for plant growth. Cost effective. Uses established infrastructure. Measurable and repeatable increase in germination rate. Increases in nutritional density. Increase in stem width. increase in leaf size, increase in plant height, sustainable, environmentally friendly, no moving parts, minimal wear and tear, no parts to be replaced or disposed of, increases bottom line for all users. Third world communities will have a cost-effective means for improving farming methods, increasing food yields, and purifying water. In the near future, every farm, dwelling, and community will have the imploder, water treatment device installed. Again, to learn more about this amazing technology, visit OmniGreenLife.com today. Okay, we're back from the break. So now smart meters, if you have one on your house presently, is there any solution or any hope for those people?
Yeah, well, some people had to move out. The other hope is to bitch like mad, and there's some organizations now that are really fighting it. Some states have gotten wise and have banned the installation, but if they're on there, just read today of a case in California where somebody who was dreadfully ill from his meter got the PUC to agree to replace the analog meter that was on there. No, but that's an exception. I think the best strategy is to try to prevent them being installed. Like, I'm going to move away for 6 months to go south. I put a big sign on my old analog meter, do not replace, with a smart meter, and I'm going to call the utility and tell them the same thing. In fact, I might build a box around it so they can't take it off without ripping it off, and then I could sue them for trespass and for property destruction. But, I mean, I don't know what else to do. Once it's there, it's there. What you can do in the house, if you find it bothers you, is you can move as far away from the meter in the house. If you say it's on a bedroom wall, sleep someplace else. That's about all you can do. And I mean, that's not saying a whole lot.
So now I'm to understand that, and perhaps you cover this in the book, that if you have a smart meter, it is actually, well, let me back up for a moment. Before the smart meter was put on, and it had the analog type of meters, am I to understand that those old analogs did not kick out as much dirty electricity as the smart meters?
They don't kick out any. I mean, they're simple electric motors, and that makes that disc go around. And the faster it goes around, the more bill you pay. These smart meters, they've got one or two transmitters. Some of them have three microwave transmitters to transmit what they pick up to the utility. And they also, since all transmitters run on direct current, every one of them's got a switching power supply in it that, unless it's built better than I think it's built, is going to generate dirty electricity. And I didn't define what it was. It's actually the way it's measured is with a Stetzer meter, and the meter basically measures the rate of change of voltage over time. In calculus, it's dV dt. And so basically, the frequency is what drives how high that meter reads as compared to the voltage, because the voltage just doesn't change that much. But the really high frequency stuff, changing rapidly over time, gives you very high readings of this. And I've many houses that I've looked at where people are symptomatic and have problems. If you can get the dirty electricity cut down, they seem to improve, get better, get well.
I'm trying to understand. You made it clear that the older type of analog are they're okay, right?
Just a simple motor. I mean, it's a tiny little motor in there that spins when you use electricity, and it's got gears and dials to, like a clock, to just measure how often it spins and how much electricity you're using. The new ones, they don't have that motor. They have a switching power supply that changes the incoming AC to DC, and then they've got transmitters hooked up to record how much electricity you use. And what's really interesting is the waveforms are signatures for how you're using it. Like, smart people can look at those waveforms and tell you if it's your refrigerator, if it's your stove, if it's your water heater, etc.
Now, the older meters, though, let's be clear, they didn't create dirty electricity, but there's still, even with for those that still have the old analog, it's still dirty electricity because it's inherent in the electrical grid, correct?
Yeah, well, but I didn't understand you. What I'm saying is the old analog meter didn't add a whole lot of dirty electricity to anything. But even before the smart meters, the grid's been dirty ever since Edison. We're talking 1800s. And that's why, New York City people around the turn of the century were living 7 years shorter lifespan than people elsewhere. That's why the Amish were living like 20 years longer. They didn't use electricity at all. No, the dirty electricity has been in the grid since Edison, but since we started with all these nonlinear loads, these switching power supply devices, like computers and the things that charge your cell phones and all the little wall warts that you see in hospital emergency rooms, all those things add to the dirty electricity. And that coupled with, and it gets back into the wires, not only in your house, but it runs out and into the ground, and it comes into your house from your neighbors and from neighboring businesses through, metal water pipes or sewer pipes and through your ground rods. So, you can have nothing on in your house. You can throw the electric service switch off in your house and still find lots of dirty electricity and magnetic fields in your wiring, courtesy of the neighbors and the earth, see?
Right, and we want to make this clear to the listeners that everything you mentioned has been going on, and now, if we fast forward to today, we have smart meters that even increase more of the dirty electricity.
Yeah, they add to it. Just think, there's one of these in every house. They're talking millions in California. They've got to be increasing the dirty electricity load in the whole area that they're plugged in. You think about an apartment house with, say, a meter for every apartment. Just say it's a 100 apartment complex. I mean, there's 100 more sources of dirty electricity there. And it's not just the dirty electricity, it's the microwaves that are coming off the meters to communicate back to the utility that are a problem for a lot of people. But I kind of think the dirty electricity is the most serious of the problems.
Now, if somebody has one of these smart meters, what is the solution? I mean, you mentioned earlier that they could move out of their house, but that's not realistic in the country.
Oh, no. Well, like I say, you can move away from it in the house. You can take care of the dirty electricity component fairly well with filters marketed by Dave Stetzer. Less EMF in Albany has them, and a couple other outlets have them. You plug these into your outlets. Well, actually, what you should do is buy the meter and measure. If your outlets are really high, then with dirty electricity, say above 50, then you can install these plug-in filters that last forever, basically, to knock the dirty electricity down. But it won't do a thing for the microwaves that are coming off the meter. I've got our radio frequency meter made by Gigahertz Solutions. It's called an HF35C. And you stand out there pointed at the meter, say, from 10 feet, and every time the meter fires its microwaves, the smart meter fires its microwave, this RF meter, howls. It's got an audio thing on it, and I can read, how much RF is getting put out. And many of these meters, peg my RF meter, max it out at, every 10 seconds or something like that. Some of them do it the whole time.
Now, one person has a question because they're very concerned, Doctor. They did some research, and you had mentioned some of these. I believe you mentioned a Stelter filter?
Stetzer, S-T-E-T-Z-E-R.
Thank you. They did some research, and they said in their research that they're shunt capacitors, right, that plug into the outlet, correct?
Yeah, they're thin film capacitors that plug into the outlet.
Now, their question is, they say that these filters only filter differential noise, but nothing. They do nothing for common mode. Can you comment on that?
Well, that's true, but I've installed hundreds of them, and maybe, well, not that many houses, but I've seen what happens. If you put them in, they put them into a school in Wisconsin that had sick building syndrome. Everybody was sick. They spent millions to get rid of the mold and new carpets and everything. They put the filters in, and everybody in the school recovered. What was really interesting is kids are using inhalers for asthma, exercise-induced asthma. Only 3 of them still used it after the filters were installed. Principal was, at death's door from allegedly MS. She's recovered essentially completely and has gotten married and had a kid. I mean, and there's other houses, other places I've been where you put the filters in, and people, they notice a difference within minutes. It's true, it doesn't knock out common mode noise, but it seems that the differential mode noise is the major problem.
Okay, can you for the listeners that might be confused by what I stated as a question, can you please clarify the difference between differential noise and common mode, please?
They're going to have to go to Wikipedia and look up our radio frequency interference, and there's a nice description. I confused the two. I've read it 3 or 4 times, and I'm a doc. I'm not an electrical engineer. I just know that the filters work symptomatically. In fact, I'm going to filter a library out here that's got really high levels of it, and we'll see what happens to the people. So,
the only reason why I think that person asked that question is because they feel the only way to filter the power is a solution that's very expensive. It's very heavy military-grade filters that go down to like 10 kilohertz. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, well, the filters that Stetzer puts in, they filter between, I think, something like 2 to 110 kilohertz. They take care of 10. And it's the stuff above 2 that's really important, because those frequencies, go internal in the body readily compared to the 60 cycle stuff. The magnetic field's going everywhere, but we're talking about electric fields, voltage, and the Stetzer filter covers the kilohertz range pretty well.
Okay, so if you are listening to this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Doctor, you'd have to put these Stetzer filters throughout your whole house in order to get the combined protection, correct?
Not necessarily. Like I measured a house a couple weeks ago where the woman was sick, and her outlets were fine. I mean, she didn't have an outlet above 40, so she didn't need any filters. But I used the radio frequency meter and found out that she had a decked phone. Those are just terrible. Digital enhanced cordless telephones. They're portable phones, and the situation there is the base of the phone, even if it's not receiving or transmitting, is putting out microwave radiation very strong at 24/7. In fact, Magda Havas did a study with decked phones and showed that when she exposed people to the base, women to the base, in a blind deal, about 20% of it changed their heart rate and rhythm. So it had cardiac effects right away. But I got rid of this woman's decked phones, and the other thing I didn't get rid of was I discovered that she had new appliances, and the damn appliances had embedded transmitters, which were put there to transmit to the smart meter she didn't have yet. But it's too late for her to get rid of those appliances. But I called her about a week later after she got rid of the phone, and she said almost all her problems had disappeared. Her headache and sleeplessness and whatever else. She had pep and energy, and the brain fog had lifted too. So I think the microwaves from her decked phone were making her sick.
So if you do have a smart meter, can one still have a smart meter and get these particular filters and be safe then?
Well, no, it just takes care of the high-frequency, dirty electricity. It doesn't do anything about the microwaves that are coming off it.
Okay, but how powerful is the microwave energy coming off of it?
Well, for some people, it's really bad. I mean, I talked to a guy who put one in. They put it in, and he couldn't sleep that night. And they did some experimenting. If he moved to the other end of the house, he could sleep again. But I met a woman who, they put her smart meter in, and she was, immediately violently ill. She was puking and vomiting, and just felt weak and flushed, and she moved into her uncle's house for a while. Every time she goes back to her house, she gets sick again. So in her case, she had installed the filters already, and didn't people are very, very sensitive, and the smart meters put out a lot more the higher microwave frequencies than the megahertz and gigahertz frequencies. The smart third electricity filters basically are cleaning up the kilohertz range, and so for people who are really sensitive to the smart meters, I'd say it's worth a try with the filters. But if they don't do it, then you're going to have to try to petition the utility to give you back your old meter.
Let me ask you this question. This comes directly from one of the smart meter electric companies, and they have their question and answer.
Yeah.
Okay, it says, is there a health risk related to smart meters? Now, the reply from the electrical company is the following. No, your smart meter transmitter power output is low, 1 watt, and its signal level decreases significantly with distance, making the overall radio frequency field levels in a neighborhood of smart meters very low as well. Please take a look at the California Council of Science and Technology study recently completed on remote metering. As you review this study, keep in mind it assumes that the meter is transmitting 100% of the time, where our meter is transmitting much less, normally 1 minute per day. You can get the full report by visiting the California Council of Science Technology website. So can you please comment on what they said? Is that accurate?
No, absolutely not. Look, I stood at a smart meter on a guy's house up in Yucca Valley, and I had the meter on, and it was blasting the whole time. I mean, it was pegging the meter every 10 seconds in between the times. It never went back to zero. So this business about 1% of the time or 1 minute a day, that's garbage. I mean, I've done enough meters to know that that's strictly not true. The other thing is these learned councils, they always fall back on FCC rules and regs. FCC says if it doesn't cook you, if it's not a thermal, if it doesn't heat you up, it's safe. Well, that's bogus too. These trivial fields have tremendous biologic effects in whole animals and whole people and in the lab. I mean, they break DNA, they open the blood-brain barrier, they change the way your ions migrate in and out of cells. So, I mean, I just don't like it.
Okay, but would you agree that 1 watt is very low power?
Well, yeah, it depends. I mean, if you're sensitive, 1 watt might be enough to kill you. I mean, it is power, but what's really important is frequency and wavelength and how far it transmits and where you are in relation to it. It's true that the field strengths drop off with distance, but that's true of all electromagnetic fields. There's no surprise there. In other words, if it makes you sick close up, get away from it. But I don't think that the fact that it's 1 watt makes it harmless.
Do you think having a brick home versus, let's say, because in some neighborhoods, you have brick homes, and then you have placard board, which is just this thin kind of flimsy wood, versus stone. Do you feel like the house, if your house is made out of a certain material, do you think there's more protection there in regard to?
I don't think so, because these things penetrate. The only kind of house that would protect you is if you had a metal house built a Faraday cage, or if you got a concrete house that's got lots of rebar in it, steel rods for reinforcement. You can build they built Faraday cages out of grounded wire, and they will intercept a lot of the stuff that's coming in. But most houses, the only advantage you'd have with the brick wall is the meter would be, say, a brick's length further from your head if your bedroom's right there, because they'd have to it puts the meter physically, a brick's length away from your head, unless the brick is sideways. Whereas some of these clapboard houses, to think it'd just be inches from you.
In your book, you clearly make it clear that there is a correlation, a connection to cancer and other diseases. Can you comment on the fact and speak to the percentage that never have an effect or never get an effect from the electricity? And what would that percentage be?
Unfortunately, since everybody's exposed now, even the Amish now, they're exposed to ground currents since the utilities are dumping the stuff in the ground. They give you the best clue as to, in this day and age, in this country, what you could expect if you didn't have residential electrification, because the old order Amish don't use it. Now, the diabetes prevalence and incidence in the Amish is about 40% of ours, okay? So that means you could prevent 60% of the diabetes if you were in a situation like the Amish where they don't have residential, they don't have electricity coming to their houses, they don't use cell phones and the rest of that. Now, the cancer rates, there was a study done fairly recently, and I looked at that. This is just in the Amish, and I think it was in Wisconsin. This is an incidence study, new cases of cancer. They're about half of what ours are. The other thing I notice is, I refer to it in my book, an author named Ruff, pediatrician, and a group that took care of Amish kids. They'd never seen an Amish kid overweight, childhood obesity, and they never saw a case of ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Now, that brings to mind a little study I did a couple of years ago. I was helping teachers at a school that were having cancer from it was dirty electricity related, but this school was unusual in that it had a cell tower right there on the school property, the base of which was just like 25 feet from the nearest classroom. I had the teachers measure the dirty electricity in the classrooms with the Stetzer meter, and the distance from the base of the tower predicted the dirty electricity levels. There's a picture in my book, a graph of it. One of the teachers, when I was doing that, the school ultimately never cooperated. The school district said no. I offered to clean the place up for free, but before they said no, I cleaned up one of the classrooms where a teacher was complaining that her kids were unteachable. They were just hyperactive, jumping around, and couldn't concentrate, didn't pay attention. I put the meters in 5 outlets in a room on a Friday night. I think it was a 4th grade class, and the levels were about 5,000 before, and I got them down to 40 throughout the classroom, 5,000 Stetzer units. And she called me next week and said, "What'd you do?" I said, "Well, I just got rid of the dirty electricity, shorted it out with the filters." She said, "Well, the kids were perfect on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday." And I said, "Well, what's different about Wednesday?" She said, "Oh, my God, it's library day." So I wrote this up, and it's going to get published soon. And, so there's one condition that's almost certainly related to this dirty electricity. And the drug that they use to treat it, Ritalin, is an analog of phenylethylamine, which is very low in these people. And I just found a paper, people studied, people lived around a new microwave tower in Germany, and they showed that their neurotransmitters, including phenylethylamine, changed all over the place. And but they thought it was due to the radio frequency from the tower. But at this school, I didn't shut off the tower. The tower was working like 100%. But we got rid of the dirty electricity. Got rid of the ADHD. Now, in researching the study, I found a book by John Ott. He developed the Ott light, and he did the stop-action photography. How flowers bloom and how tendrils move. He worked for Disney for a while, but he did some studies in a Florida schools, I think, Sarasota, and he noticed that the kids were hyperactive in rooms that had unshielded fluorescent lights. And I don't think he knew about dirty electricity, but he was smart enough to ground some of the lights, put metal screen in front of and ground it. And those rooms, the kids were perfectly normal. And he's got video of before and after, and actually moved kids from one room to another. I talked to Stetzer about ADHD. I said, "Hey, in the hundreds of houses you've cleaned up, have you noticed any difference school. So I wrote that paper, and there's another dirty electricity disease, I'm sure.
Speaking of getting back to Stetzers real quickly again, if you use Stetzers in conjunction with fill in the blank, what would that be? Short of making Faraday cage in every single room of your house, I guess what I'm saying is that the smart meters, if a person does choose to, keep their smart meter, because I understand a lot of the technology that they're going to, the products are going to be chipped with smart meters. A lot of the products won't work if you don't have a smart meter. Can you comment on that?
What products?